Hello, and welcome to part 2 of the Whatcast's Hot Takes look at the universal cards that are available in the Magore's Fiends expansion. Now, as always, the Hot Takes series is done whenever a new expansion comes out. And I just go through all of the new cards divided by type and giving out my first initial read and hot takes of whatever I think about this particular card. And the purpose of this is to kind of get some initial ideas out there and to try to predict how the meta is going to be affected by these cards. Again, this time we're looking at the universal upgrades that are available in the Magore's Fiends expansion. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, our first card is Dark Darts. It's an attack card, 3 hex range, 3 daggers, 1 damage, and it has cleave. So if this looks familiar to you, this is very nearly a copy of Shadeglass Darts. It trades out the +1 damage on a crit for cleave. Now, in general terms, I think strictly Shadeglass Darts is better. Because when I'm throwing 3 dice, I have a pretty reasonable chance to score a crit, which is going to get me that 2 damage instead of 1. While cleave is nice, only about half of the warbands in the game, actually a little over half with the release of Magore's Fiends, have block value for defense. Now, all that being said, I think the real purpose of Dark Darts is to give you 2 options for putting range attacks on characters that usually can't get them. With these, you could have 2 of your warband members throwing Shade Glass at people. Any more than that, and I would wonder, why aren't you just playing Farstriders? You would play this if, along with Shade Glass Darts, if you are really, you have a specific reason not to play Farstrider. Perhaps there's an aspect of another faction that you're really looking to capitalize, but you still want the board control capability that the Farstriders have. Like many attacks, I focus here mostly on the type of dice and the number of dice you're throwing. I'm a big fan of throwing 3 dice in general, whether it's daggers or hammers. Just because you've got a pretty high chance of getting a cleave, and we're seeing a lot more effects in the meta that are going to trigger off of cleave. It's a solid card. Deathly Fortitude. -2 move and +2 wounds. Short and simple. I think it's somewhat hilarious that they've put a Fire Slayer on the art for this, because that is definitely one of the warbands that I could never see this used for. A 2 wound bump is pretty nice. I'm not sure that I'm willing to sacrifice 2 move for it unless I already happen to be wherever I want to be. There are a number of decks out there that are built to get to a point, a particular objective, and stay there forever, preferably with a character that's extremely hard to kill. For example, Gurzag or Angarad Brightshield. Using Angarad as an example, putting this on her is going to make her almost immobile, but when most of her abilities are based around being immobile, and that there are several objectives that reward you for holding the same objective for multiple turns, this is going to put her up to 6 wounds plus all of her other defensive buffs. She's going to be really tough to take out. Imagine how difficult Gurzag is going to be able to, or is going to be to take out if he has 7 wounds. Now, I'm not saying I would ever put this on Gurzag, particularly because he needs to move so that he can bring his damage to bear, and definitely not for Fuel Grimnir. But for a character or a playstyle that is based around defensive play, holding a single particular point on the board, this could be very useful. The downsides of this, a lot of times defensive builds, as we're seeing in the current meta, aren't really based around holding a particular point as they are staying alive. and a big part of staying alive is going to be moving away from threats. This is going to prevent that. Another option you could use this for is you could use this on a very fast character, say a Blood Reaver or a Skaven, even Riptooth, uh, and trade off some of their excess movement, though I don't know that you can really ever call any amount of movement excessive, to make them tougher to take out. I'm thinking particularly of putting this on, say, Scritch, if you're finding that your strategy is suffering because people keep going after a particular character, especially Scritch. It's not bad, but again, this is very situational, and I don't see this being used for all decks. Ghostblade. One, one hex range, 2 hammers, that's okay. 1 damage, that's awful. When rolling defense dice, only rolls of crit are successes for the target of this attack action. Okay. This attack action can never cause more than 1 damage to a target. Okay, so you can't play the system and pump this up with a bunch of different buffs, which is understandable, because being able to avoid any defenses other than crits is quite powerful, especially if you're frequently finding in your meta that you're running into a lot of high defense characters, or a lot of players that like to greatly use the guard mechanic. We're not sure yet if these cards will be carried into the next season of Warhammer Underworlds, but we do know that the Night Haunt are going to have some sort of interaction with the guard mechanics, so it's going to be worth keeping this in the back of your mind. You do kind of suffer from being able to do a max of 1 damage, but keep in mind that it only says the 1 damage can only come from this attack action. You're still able to do things like twist the knife or trap. That being said, this does have a very situational, very specific use, and that is some amount of highly reliable damage. A small amount of reliable damage, but very reliable damage nonetheless, if you're having trouble dealing with high defense characters or guarding characters. It's also worth mentioning that this also discounts the use of support bumps as successes. So if you frequently find yourself playing against opponents that like to clump up, this can penalize them for that. Also, keep in mind that there are a few objectives that are based around being able to hit somebody when they have more support dice than you. This almost seems tailor-made for that, because their number of supporting fighters is completely irrelevant to this. It's not going to help. Okay, yet another Cataphrane piece, and this is the Cataphrane piece that will officially complete the set. I'm not going to go too far into this because I've talked about the Cataphrane set to death, and I do plan on doing a full video on different opportunities to do a Cataphrane deck. Shade Glass Dagger, yet another Shade Glass weapon. 1 hex range, 3 daggers for attack, which is very nice, and 3 damage. Wow. This has got this standard Shade Glass traits of when you manage to hit somebody, you discard it, and on a critical hit, which again, 3 dagger, throwing 3 daggers, you're likely to get a crit. You get +1 damage. That takes it up to 4. This is a one-shot machine. In fact, generally, just looking at this, I think that this is better on paper than Hero Slayer. And here's why I think that. Hero Slayer's big problem is it has 2 big problems. One, it puts a ginormous target on whatever you've equipped it on. And 2, Hero Slayer is extremely inaccurate. You're only throwing 1 hammer to get that, and to do 4 damage. Also, 4 damage is overkill for quite a few fighters in the meta. Now, Shade Glass Dagger does have the disadvantage of you can only successfully attack with it once, but that attack is probably going to hit. And if it's going to hit, it's probably going to involve a crit and therefore do that 4 damage that you're looking for. I can definitely see this being a very strong option on anybody who I imagine I'm only going to get to attack with once anyway. Say a chaff unit, because as soon as I put this on, say, a petitioner or one of the Targor or Arnulf in the Blood Reavers or some of the chaff Skaven, they're going to be killed. They're going to become a high priority target anyway. The fact that I can only use this once is not going to be a huge detriment to me. Overall, I think it's very strong. And if I was playing a deck built around turning my chaff into very credible threats, I could see playing both this and Hero Slayer. But if I had a choice of only one, I think I would go with this. In fact, come to think of it, I think this might be, in my opinion, I think this is the best of the Shade Glass weapons, so it's interesting that it was the last one to come out. Alright, Tethered Spirit. There's a lot of text on this one. During an attack action or ploy that takes this fighter out of action, roll a defense dice. If you roll a shield or crit, place them on any starting hex in your territory, ignore the damage, and discard this upgrade. If you cannot, they are taken out of action. Okay. So we've seen several cards that give them this 50% save or die chance. It's interesting that this kind of also comes with the Illusory Fighter ability. This it does specify your territory only, so you can't do a Skaven type shenanigan and pop your guy up on the other side of the board, which is a little bit unfortunate. But I do like that this can turn what was a suicide aggressive unit, for example, somebody like Blooded Sake, or perhaps an exceedingly well-armed Skaven, as I was just speaking about earlier. I like how this can turn them from a suicide aggressive unit into a sudden unexpected defensive unit. And also, anytime you can save one of your guys from death is going to be a net positive. Is it worth one of your upgrade slots? I would say, honestly, yes. If you're comparing this to something like Soul Trap, Soul Trap is basically the first half of this card, without the placing them on a starting hex in your territory. The difference with Soul Trap is you leave them right where they are, which means if they're in a dangerous position, they're still in a dangerous position. Now, if you're playing very aggressively, you may actually want them to still be there, but I think on the whole, being able to switch it up on your opponent and suddenly teleport the fighter that they thought was dead across the board to support your other fighters is overall better. I give a slight edge to this one over Soul Trap. Formless Key. Okay, we've seen a lot of keys, and this one is slightly different. If this fighter is holding an objective in the third end phase, score 1 glory point. The other keys give you 2 glory points, but they specify an individual numbered objective, which one of the biggest problems with that is that you can definitely find yourself in a situation where that objective is completely unreachable to you, especially if you're playing a slower faction, for example, Fire Slayers or the Sepulchral Guard. Having this one affect any of them is really nice. And of course, it's always great to get a glory point off anything that is not an objective card. That being said, is an upgrade worth 1 glory point? I'm not really sure that it is. To me, the great benefit of the other keys is that I'm getting 2 glory points out of that deal. Only getting 1 glory point does slightly shift the math to me to make this a weaker option. All right, Trusted Defender. I will firmly admit to having an unreasonable bias in favor of any card that features art of or a quote from Angharad Brightshield, because she is the best character in this game. Okay, so it's an upgrade. You can reroll 1 defense dice for this fighter when they are the target of an attack action. Holy crap! I want to make sure I'm not misreading that. You can reroll 1 defense dice for this fighter when they are the target of an attack action. That is excellent. Especially on somebody like Angharad or perhaps one of the other Stormcast. Lurking Skaven, anybody that's got 2 or more defense dice. Anybody who's played against Ironjaws or played as Ironjaws will know just how powerful it is that Gurzak has his ability to reroll 1 die. And having this as a straight upgrade that applies every time, I think this may be the best card in this set, at least as far as upgrades go. Especially because it synergizes so well with so many strategies right now that are built around having somebody that is extremely hard to kill and extremely hard to shift. Part of me almost feels like this should have just been a Stormcast Liberators factional card. But I do like that it's going to be available to other factions. I'm not really seeing a lot of a downside for this. It's about as solid as upgrades get, like great strength or anything like that. Unparalleled Strike. Okay. Zimtak, 1 Hex, 1 Hammer, which is awful. That's Hero Slayer territory. And 2 damage, which is okay. Rolls of Hammer are considered to be rolls of crit for this attack action. Now that definitely moves the needle for me. On that 1 die, you have a 50% of what is an effective crit. Yes, you're only throwing 1 die. Yes, you are only doing 2 damage. But keep in mind Concealed Weapon, which we saw in the Farsighter set, which gives somebody plus 2 damage if they throw a crit. Consider how many cards in this game can allow somebody a reroll on an attack or extra dice, particularly in the Khornate factions. This is all about activating different strategies that you may have around fishing for crits. This doesn't fish for crits so much as throw dynamite in the water and pick crits up out of it. This is not going to be a card for everybody, but it's going to be outstanding for a few builds that are built around maximizing the crit mechanic. Warcry. When this fighter makes a charge action, their attack actions gain knockback 1 for that activation. Okay. Knockback is highly useful. I mean, keep in mind that whenever you attack something, you're getting 1 knockback anyway. Having knockback 1 is going to give you 2 hexes. And knocking somebody back 2 hexes, especially from an objective, almost ensures that if they've already used a move or a charge, they're not getting back on that objective, because very few of the movement shenanigans ploys are going to give them any more than 1 hex worth of movement. This can pound somebody right out of line and into a place where they may become useless for a phase. Um, I'm particularly interested in seeing this used in conjunction with some of the ranged attacks. Because keep in mind, you can make a charge with the ranged attacks if you have Shade Glass Darts or the new Dark Darts, or if you're playing Forest Riders. There's no reason why you can't charge and then shoot. So if your whole strategy is going to be based off of trolling people by knocking them off of objectives, picture how much a Boltstorm pistol with a knockback of 1, technically 2, once you've succeeded at the hit, is going to be. Yeah, that's a pretty good one. It does read a little bit specific, a little bit situational, and I think it is. But I think it's going to have a lot more utility than is otherwise directly apparent. Okay, and that's it for the universal upgrades that are available in the Magore's faction. Uh, I think that this is a pretty solid set, honestly. It's nothing that's going to be extremely game breaking. I do think, like all the best sets, this kind of gives birth to a new set of strategies that we'll be able to see in a new set of deck styles. It also reinforces some other ones that had been created by previous expansions. Um, there isn't anything that I saw in here that was an absolute trap or a stinker, so I'm pretty pleased with it overall. But it remains to be seen how good the ploys are in both this faction expansion and that of the Forest Riders. We'll be looking at those very soon. So until then, please add your comments below and let me know how you feel about these cards and what kind of first impressions you're getting. Other than that, please like, share, and subscribe in order to help us bring you more Warhammer Underworlds content. Until the next time, have a good one.